Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? A few days ago I did a video talking about what I like about 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. So now that that's out of the way, we'll get back to our regularly scheduled program where Ivan is nitpicky. And that's kind of a joke, sort of. But anyhow, today I wanted to talk about saving throws in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, what my experience has been with them, reading the game, analyzing the game, playing the game, running the game, what has it actually been like on the ground, in the trenches, all that sort of thing. So I'm pretty sure that most of the people watching this video know what saving throws are and how they work, but for the sake of completeness, I'll go over that a little bit, so indulge me. A saving throw is something you do in the game when something nasty is about to happen, to you, to another creature, whatever happens to be. That target of the or the recipient of that nastiness gets to roll a d20 and make a saving throw, and they're trying to roll a targeted number or higher, a difficulty or higher, in order to avoid or partially avoid the effects of this nasty thing, whatever it happens to be, whether it's darts flying out of the wall that you have to jump out of the way of, or a poisonous creature has bitten you and you're trying to avoid the effects of the poison, or avoid the gaze of a Medusa and not turn to stone, or whatever it happens to be. And if you roll the targeted number or higher, then you've escaped or partially escaped the effects of the nasty thing. And generally what happens is either you save for completely no effect, or sometimes you save for half damage. And there are certain creatures and certain classes of characters which at some point have an ability, or an ability shows up, where they take half damage normally and they can save for no damage. So pretty standard stuff. 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons does something really cool where they have all 6 ability scores associated with various saves. So you can make saves based on Constitution or Intelligence or Wisdom or Strength or whatever happens to be. They all tend to make sense, so I really like that a great deal. So they are, in a sense, ability checks, just like everything else in the game. You're rolling a d20 and you're adding numbers to it. And where do the numbers come from? Well, it's your ability score modifier. So if you're making a strength saving throw, if something's trying to grapple or wrap tentacles around you, you might be making a strength saving throw, and you'll add your strength modifier, whatever that happens to be, to the d20 roll. And you may have proficiency in that save. And certain classes, have proficiency, I think, in a couple different saves. And so it varies what kind of save, whether you have proficiency in intelligence saves, or, strength saves, or constitution saves, or what have you. And you get to add your proficiency modifier to that. So right out of the gate at first level, depending upon your scores, etc., you're going to have modifiers of anywhere from -1 to +5 to a given save. By 5th level, that range is like -1 to +7. And by 20th level, it's all the way up to +11. If you have maxed out an ability score and you happen to have proficiency in it, your proficiency bonus is that high. It can be quite high. That's going to be pretty rare that you're going to be at 20th level of play. But there's some kind of modifier. And usually it's relatively unusual to have modifiers of less than -1, because you're probably not going to have ability scores that have gotten that low unless something awful happened. Maybe you'll have a disadvantage on the saving throw. But it's a standard ability check, is my point. The other important thing about how saving throws work is how to calculate the number. Now, if a monster or whatever has a saving throw based on an effect like the Medusa's gaze, it's right there in the book. However, if you're a spellcaster, and let's be honest, most classes are, then you have a save DC associated with your spells. So when you're casting a spell that has a chance for a creature to save from, there's a number, a difficulty number associated with that. Well, where does that number come from? It comes from this formula. If you're doing some other things that aren't spell related, like let's say the disarming strike of the Battlemaster, the infamous disarming strike, well, that's also using this same formula to develop this saving throw, or generate the saving difficulty number, and it's based upon your strength and your strength modifiers. So where's this number come from? It's the number 8 plus the relevant ability score modifier. So for the Battlemaster here, it would be strength. For the wizard casting a spell, it would be intelligence, plus their proficiency modifier. So at first level, if a wizard has completely maxed out his intelligence, then his save DC is going to be no higher than 13. That's the number that somebody has to roll in order to beat it. By 5th level, it's 15 if you've once again maxed out your ability scores and your proficiency bonus has gotten a little bit higher. And by 20th level, if you've completely maxed everything out, well, then your save difficulty number for somebody to save versus one of your spells or one of your effects is now 19. So it has that kind of smallish sort of range. And some things you're never going to get any better at saving at, because you're never going to increase that ability score, and you're, say, never going to have proficiency in that saving throw either. So it's kind of this narrow spread, which is cool. There are some interesting effects that happen as a result of the way saving throws are handled in the book and generated. And this, at least in my experience, it's not a poor design aspect. So I'm not going to pick on the game in terms of poor design. It's strictly an aesthetic effect. And some of this you may like, some of this you may not like. I'm of kind of two minds about it, depending. In general, it's very easy to save versus quite a few things. The threats of yore are not quite as threatening anymore. So the game definitely reinforces the idea that it's harder to kill or incapacitate or turn the characters to stone, all that sort of stuff. It's not quite as easy as it was in the olden days. So they've achieved their desired effect. However, there are some other things I noticed that start to happen. First off, let me just say overall, the effect of the way saves are handled, the way the numbers are generated, the way the numbers are in the book, and one other part which I'm going to get to, which I did not mention, is that on both sides of the metaphorical or real DM screen, the power of the creatures and of the spells of the spellcasting characters are kind of neutered, for lack of a better word. They're not as powerful or as effective as they used to be. It's kind of one of these things like what's good for the goose is what's good for the gander. It's going to affect you just as much as it affects the bad guy. It's been my experience in the game that as the players are casting various spells and doing various things, it's fairly easy for the competition, for the monsters, to save versus their effect. Certainly when the saving throw DC was 13, that's a 40% chance of success. By the time it's 15 and some of our players have gotten themselves up to this level, that's still a 30% chance of success, that the creature, the targeted creature, is going to not suffer the effects of whatever that spell happens to be. So very often they cast a spell and it doesn't work, and which can be a little bit disheartening. They don't hit as often, And so that's just an effect that shows up. It's just something to be aware of. And it does produce a bit of a feel where things become a little, especially when they're burning spell slots, they're not just using cantrips, where it feels a little bit, you can see they get a little crestfallen. And you feel a little bit more impotent when these sorts of things happen. And also, you have to remember, too, these numbers are based on the monsters not having any bonuses to their saves. And very often you'll read the monster manual and they might have a plus to their intelligence or constitution or dexterity or whatever it happens to be. So it's actually easier for them to save versus these effects than just the base difficulty number, because they're getting to add a bonus to that roll. Every once in a while they have a penalty, but not too often. On the other side of the screen, what I've noticed, what starts to happen, is that creatures that used to be, or on paper look really, really scary, aren't. Because very often the difficulty number to save against them is a little low, and then very often the character might have a bonus in that particular save, so they're saving maybe 50%, 55% of the time, 60% of the time, depending on the effect and depending on the creature. However, what really seems to take the wind out of the sails of a lot of these things is the fact that you very often get to save over and over again. Many of the effects last for a minute, so that's 10 rounds. And every round you have the opportunity to save again to see if the effect ends. And we had some encounters with a sea hag, which on paper looks absolutely horrible, and they can frighten the characters, and the death gaze can cause them to fall down at least mostly dead, that sort of thing. However, the fear, I believe every round they get to save. I'm not sure, but I might be misspeaking about that. But let's look at something I'm not misspeaking about. Let's look at something like ghoul paralysis. Now, this is something that instant pucker factor. Back in the day, man, you just did not want to be that gnome in the first edition, Dungeon Master's Guide that got hit, and paralyzed with a ghoul and dragged, into that hole and just rent to bits. You didn't want to be that guy, and very often it happened. So nowadays, a ghoul, when they attempt to paralyze you, it's a DC 10 Constitution save. So you have a 55% chance of success. Okay, cool. If you fail that, well, now you're paralyzed for up to a minute. Okay, that's kind of a bummer. This could get really, really bad. However, you get to make that saving throw every single round, and you can come to and no longer be paralyzed. So, and you can do that, it's I guess 9 more times. So looking at this, let's just say you don't have any bonus, Constitution bonus. You're going with that straight 55% chance of success. Well, that's a 45% failure rate. Your chances of being paralyzed for 6 seconds are 45%. 10 seconds, 12 seconds for two of your turns, you get to save again. So now you're only going to be like 20%, 20 and a quarter percent. For 3 rounds, only about like a little over 9%. 4 rounds, about 4%. By 5 rounds, you're down to 2%. 6 rounds, it's like 1%. Your chances of spending that entire minute paralyzed are very, very small, almost non-existent. And this tends to happen in various other areas. Now that's one that's pretty easy to save from. Something like a Mind Flayer's Brain Blast, which I did throw Mind Flayers as a kid. That's cool. Your chance of failing this, well, that's a DC 15. So it's 70% chance of failure. You're taking a hit, and it's for hit points, and you're going down for a little while. But as time goes on, by the time you're like say 4 rounds into it, you've only got a 25% chance, 24% chance of still being down. You're generally going to come to and get back in the fight and that sort of thing. I'll talk about that in another video because there's definitely a thing I see happening with the game. But you got something like a Medusa. Now, Medusa is probably one of the scariest things in the entire book. As far as saving throws, there's probably other things. It's a DC 14 save. You got a 35% chance of succeeding right out of the gate and not being turned to stone. You got a 40. If you fail by 5 or more, then you're turned to stone instantly. You got a 40% chance of just being turned to stone instantly. But you get to make one more save, and you can either, and that 25% of the chance you're going to be in that middle zone where you're kind of paralyzed for a moment, sort of turn to stone. And, I think it's something like, 18, I'm not going to go into all the details, but at the end of the day, 43.75% of the time, you're going to succeed. You're not going to be turned to stone. You might have been paralyzed for like 6 seconds, but then you're okay. 56.25% of the time, you're turned to stone. That's pretty bad. That's pretty awful. But that is also based on you not having any kind of constitution modifier that might make it easier for you to not save. That's the other thing, that I've noticed in the book is as things scale up, because things tend to scale up in these level-based games, don't they? Your save DCs get higher. The save DCs of the monsters also get higher. However, very often your save bonuses get higher. Maybe not in all of your ability scores, because remember, there's some that may never get better. But in general, like if you look at the monster stats too, very often they're scaling up as well. Not all the time, but it's things kind of level out. Overall, it's still difficult to have an effect on something or have an effect on something for a long period of time. And so it changes the aesthetic. It changes the way the game feels. And there are good and bad sides to this. You're not going to be put out of the fight for a really long time. It's hard to knock a character out entirely. However, because the mechanic works that way, very often you're on the other side of that screen firing things at creatures, and they're saving a lot. And, you're kind of blowing spells and having less effect than you might want to have. So it's just one of those things to be aware of. That effect kind of pervades all of the game. And, it has, at least the effect in my game, and it's taken me 13 minutes, almost 14 minutes to get to this point, is that very often the player characters are firing off spells, the monsters are doing their scary thing, and very often it's fizzling. Not all the time, but a good deal of the time. And it does feel somewhat anticlimactic and like they've all been kind of like neutered a little bit and nerfed and whatever other word you want to put there, where their abilities have been kind of like squashed. And that feeling, that aesthetic is not one that I like an awful lot. Your mileage may vary.